Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Tuesday, I asked the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs about the unexpected cut to Kanesatake's National Child Benefit Reinvestment, or NCBR. A simple question on a specific program. The NCBR provides community-based supports and services for children in low-income families. And in Kanesatake, it funded important initiatives like the Youth Centre and a hot lunch program. The answer I got from the Minister was vague and completely disconnected. He seems to have at least recognized the importance of investing in children and families, but he refused to acknowledge the negative impacts of the cuts in Kanesatake and gave no indication that he had any idea of the situation on the ground. For the record, the investment that was cut meant that children would not go without food all day long and that there would be after-school programs to keep teens off the streets. And according to a letter sent by the Grand Band Council Chief of Kanesatake, Serge Simon, to the Minister dated September of this year, a number of other cuts have been made affecting children in the community, such as to post-secondary education funding and to the residency requirement, meaning that the community is being stretched to provide opportunities for its youth. I'd like to quote the letter where Serge says, quote, "When we take into account the statistics regarding Native people in this country, how can the Canadian government justify such cuts to the neediest of our population?" End quote. Now, it's worth noting that the community has put the investment to extremely good use for years. The money was a real way to help the community prevent crime. With the high poverty rate and limited employment opportunities within the community, the hot lunch program and the after-school activities were part of the solution for the children of the band. These cuts have already forced the closure of the youth center, and the band will very soon run out of money to provide the lunches. So even 5 years after UNDRIP, a document that's not just about special rights, but about human rights, Mr. Speaker, this government is not respecting the basic needs of First Nations peoples. I recommend that the Minister and the Parliamentary Secretary read the report from the Shannon's Dream campaign to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child called Our Dreams Matter Too. It explains that, quote, "There is little evidence to suggest that Canada is making any significant progress in addressing the gap between on and off reserve education. Current estimates are that First Nations children on reserves receive $2,000 to $3,000 less per student per year for elementary and secondary education. This shortfall means less funding for teachers, special education, teaching resources such as books, science, music equipment, etc., and other essentials that other children in Canada receive." End quote. First Nations children deserve to have the basics that other children receive, and furthermore, they deserve to have it in and provided by their community with culturally appropriate content. The attitude of this minister has been up until now intransigent, difficult to work with for the community, despite their best and honest efforts to effect positive change for their community. I hope that this time the Minister or the Parliamentary Secretary will be able to answer the specific question, and I sincerely hope that he will not use the time to pat themselves on the back for their lack of equitable treatment of First Nations and their lack of concrete action. So I'll ask the Minister again whether he understands that Aboriginal communities need programming for children, especially in low-income communities like Kanesatake.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, and I believe that question was put in good faith despite the condescending tone. I'll take no lessons from that member given the length of time I've worked on these very important files. Nonetheless, I'm pleased to rise and speak to the question from the Honourable Member. The welfare of First Nation children is a priority for our government. We believe the best way to address the complex issues surrounding First Nation Child Family Services is through collaboration with First Nations, provinces and territories. In 2007, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada announced the first of several incremental investments for enhanced prevention-focused approach. And these investments provided more than $98.1 million over 5 years to implement tripartite accountability framework on new enhanced prevention approach to child and family services with Alberta First Nations in that province. We're taking a similar course in terms of education and our relationships with communities through tripartite agreements, Mr. Speaker, so that we can offer education programs and services better towards improving education outcomes on reserve. That is a priority of this government, and the record is there to show it. Today, our government continues to invest additional resources in education and child and family services. The funding is designed to provide increased flexibility to service providers, implement culturally appropriate education programs, prevention programs, protection services, which will help improve outcomes for children, youth, and their families in their schools and in their community. Mr. Speaker, education and child welfare is an area of provincial or territorial jurisdiction whereby the provinces and territories have legislative authority in these areas. Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development then is compelled and is happy to continue to move forward with all of its stakeholders towards improving better education outcomes on reserve and as well for child and family services. We continue to invest significant resources in federal programs that extend to child care benefits, child tax credits, the Canadian Child Tax Benefit, disability benefit, maternity and parental benefits, and the child care expense deduction, sensitive to the issues of many of the isolated and remote communities in the North. The issue that affects the quality of life of First Nations children are a shared responsibility. While progress has been made, it will take continued efforts of governments at all levels and the First Nations themselves to achieve long-term progress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to work in partnerships with provinces and First Nations communities in both education and enhanced prevention-focused approach to improve outcomes for First Nations children and their families in education and child and family services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Parliamentary Secretary is talking about various success stories and programs, but not about Kanesatake. Now, this question is about Kanesatake itself and about a specific program, NCBR. So that didn't answer the question at all. Now, I understand that maybe the minister last Tuesday didn't have the answer prepared, despite the fact that I had sent letters and that the community themselves had sent letters and tried to work with him. But now I would expect that they have had the time to find the answer. So the letter announcing the cuts to the people of Kanesatake indicated that the cuts are because of, quote, the increasing need for income assistance. So let me get this straight. Needs increase and the government cuts. Can he please explain the specific decision and what is the basis for the cancellation of NCBR funding in Kanesatake?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has and continues to take concrete steps to improve the lives of First Nation children on reserve. This government has increased the resources and levels of funding for child and family services and education. We work with our stakeholders to make decisions and identify priorities in terms of program service delivery on reserve, and that member would be well served to try and understand just how that dynamic works, and we'll continue to support their priorities and walk lockstep for the delivery of programs and services in both child and family services and in education. To date, Aboriginal Affairs has reached tripartite agreements to implement things like enhanced prevention-focused approach for First Nation children's family services as well in education, and we've made additional commitments in the last budget, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that moving forward First Nations communities have the kind of administrative capacity and support to be able to enhance the programs and services that they deliver, that they prioritize, and that they choose in their communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.